Hey there, everyone. This is Ryan, developer at Kiwi Creative, and welcome to another installment of our HubSpot Helper video series. Today, we are going over a powerful integration, how to connect your HubSpot and your WordPress platforms using the HubSpot Private App and its API. Later on this video, I'll be showing you an example of how we use the HubSpot Private App to display a recent blog post on our WordPress website. One thing to note though, before we get started, is you do need to have professional or enterprise level subscription in order to access private apps. And you do need to be assigned the super user admin inside your account. Now, creating the app itself is pretty easy. Almost anyone can do it. But in order to properly integrate with WordPress, you will need to have some previous knowledge of PHP and JSON. All right, well, let's get started. All right, so the first thing we need to do is to create our private app in HubSpot. So once you're logged into your HubSpot account, go up to the upper right-hand corner and click on the gear icon. This is going to take you to your general settings page. Once you're on the general settings page, go over to integrations and then select private apps. On the private apps page, this is where you can see all of your existing private apps. As you can see, we have two. One was just a test, and the other one is the one that we're actually using on our WordPress website to display blog posts. For this video, let's create a new one. So click on Create a Private App. This first screen you see here, this is just the basic information. We're just going to give it a name and a little description. So I'm going to say My Private App Test. All right, so now that I've given a name and a description, I'm going to go over to the Scopes tab. The Scopes tab is basically kind of what determines what information or what data inside your HubSpot account you have access to through the private app. So it pretty much gives you access to a lot of different areas within your HubSpot account. You can access things in the CMS, in the CRM, in your settings. So blog posts for this example is a type of content. So our pages, landing pages, emails, things of that nature. So content is under the standard. So we'll expand down standard and let's find content. All right, so here it is, content. I'm going to check that. So basically this private app is only giving access to the content within your HubSpot account and nothing else, which is kind of basically the idea of what a private app is made for, just to give you specific access to certain things in your account. The webhooks tab, we're not going to go over that for this video. It's a little beyond the scope, so we're just going to skip that for now. So let's click Create App. So you'll get a pop-up telling you that you're about to create your app and you're going to get an access token. The access token is like your secret key that gives the app access into your HubSpot account. So once you get this, make sure that you and only trusted coworkers or people in your organization have access to this token. And also it will need to be rotated probably at least once every 6 months. If not, I believe HubSpot actually rotates it for you. So, but just make sure whenever you get this access token to keep it in a secure location. So we're going to click continue creating. And then as you'll see right here, you get your private app token. So I'm going to click, so I'm going to click on this, so show token, and I'm going to click copy because we are going to need this for the next step. All right, well, that was creating the private app, and on to the next step, integrating into WordPress. Now that we have successfully created our private app in HubSpot, it's time to move over to integrating it into your WordPress website. For this example, I have set up a small one-page test website. We are using the WordPress block editor, formerly known as Gutenberg, and we are using Advanced Custom Fields Pro. I do understand that every WordPress site is set up a little differently. You may not be using Advanced Custom Fields. You may not be using the WordPress block editor. You may be using an editor such as Elementor or Visual Composer, and that's fine. But hopefully you can get the information you need from my example and integrate it into your site how it needs to be. All right, let's move on. So before we get started, the first thing I like to do when working with HubSpot APIs is always refer to their documentation. So if you go to the developer docs, you can find the specific API that you are going to be working with, and it kind of gives you most of the information you need to work with it. So I'm clicking on the blog post API. And here you can kind of shows you the filtering you have available to you. You can use the operators or the properties that you can use to filter by. And I'll show you how I'm using some of those in my code. But the really nice thing about the developer docs that I find really handy is if you click on the endpoints tab right here, they provide you with a postman here to where you can actually make a test call to your private app and see if you get a successful response to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and you can click test call. Make sure that when you do this, you are selecting the private app access token option because we are using the private app for this. And then what you want to do is you want to paste in your access token. As you can see, ours is blurred out here because we are using our live access token. But once you paste in yours, if you click send request, so now that is making a test call to your private app. And then here you can see it's getting a response. And we are getting a 200 response, which means it was successful. So what I like to do is I like to copy this response, and I'm going to go into my code here, and I just create a blank file. I'm just calling it results.json. This file is not being used for anything. I'm only pasting the code in here so I can refer to it back later and find what I need to display on the page. All right, let's move over to my template. So as I mentioned, I am using the WordPress block editor. So I have a custom block here created called recent post. And this is where I'm going to be making the API call, getting the response, and then displaying the 3 most recent blog posts. So let's start here. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is we need to just get our access token. You can technically hard code your access token in your template file. I prefer not to do that. I use advanced custom fields to create an options page to where I have a field for you to enter the access token. I like doing this because the access token needs to be rotated on a periodic basis, at least once every 6 months. It is nice having a field in the back end of your WordPress website to where you or any other admin in your site can update that token automatically. Because as a developer, you might not always be available. You might be busy, you might be on vacation, you might be out sick. If your access token would happen to get rotated on a day that you're out, it'd be nice to have somebody else in your organization has the ability to update that so that way your site keeps functioning correctly. So in my code, I am grabbing the access token from a field I created. And anybody who knows ACF knows that you use the get field function to retrieve those values from your custom fields that you've created. So I'm grabbing the token. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to first check to make sure that there is a value actually entered into that field. So I'm checking to see if it's empty. If it's empty, it's going to print an error message and it's going to cut the code short. But if there is a value in there, we're going to proceed with the code. So the first thing we want to do is we kind of want to construct our request URL. So when you make a call to an API, basically all you're doing is you're going to a URL and you're passing your request through query string parameters. So the first thing I like to do is I like to set my parameters that I'm passing in variables. So that way they're easy to update later on. You're not having to figure out where in the URL to update this at. It's just my personal way I like doing it. You can do it however you like. So for this example, it's a pretty simple example. We're just grabbing the 3 most recent blog posts. So really, I only need 3 parameters. The first one I'm going to do is a limit. So I'm just going to say, hey, I just want 3 posts. I don't want to get every post we have on our site because we have probably at least 100 blog posts on our site, and to get all those back would be crazy. So I'm going to specify that we just want 3 posts. I do only want published posts. We do have drafts and archive posts and posts that are scheduled to publish on certain dates. So I want to make sure that I'm only grabbing posts that are currently published already. And then finally, I want to specify that I want the 3 most recent blog posts. In the documentation, you saw, if you go to the filtering part, there is a created at. And this is kind of where you specify what posts you want. So
Created at will start at the beginning. So it'll grab, if you say you want them created at, it'll grab the first post that you ever posted and then go from there on out. So, but in my code, I want the 3 most recent. So I am putting a negative or a minus symbol before created at, and that specifies that I want this in descending order rather than ascending order. So now because I put that negative there, it's going to grab the most recent post first and work its way backwards. So now that I have my 3 query parameters created, I'm going to actually construct the request URL. I'm using the base URL that you find in the documentation, and then I'm appending all of my query string parameters onto them. So now that we have the query string parameter or the parameters appended onto the URL, now it's time that we have to set our request headers. Now this is probably the most important part, because without this, your call is going to be unsuccessful every time. This is where you pass in your access token to get the authorization to get access into your private app. So I'm going to create the headers, and then I'm passing the token as because you're the bearer, so you pass the token, and then now we're ready to actually make the call. So WordPress has a really handy function called WP Get Remote, as you see right here. So you can just use this, and then really all you have to do is pass it your request URL, and then we are setting the headers that you're setting in this variable right here. And this automatically will make the call, and it's going to store your response in our response variable. So once we have the response back, it's always best practice to do a little error handling first to make sure that you're actually getting a successful response back first. So WordPress does have a function called isWP_error, and then you can pass your response to this function, and it checks to see if there's any errors in your request or your response back. And if there is an error, we are going to echo out those errors. So that way, when you're testing your code, if you're getting an error, you kind of figure out what's going wrong and how to fix it. But if it passes, we're going to move on. So the next thing we need to do is first, we're going to get the response code back. And if it's a 200, which means successful, then we're going to move on to processing our response. So if we do get a successful request, the first thing we want to do is we actually want to grab the body of the response back. This is what holds our post. So WordPress has another function called WP Remote Retrieve Body. And then we pass in our response, and we're going to get the body of the response. So once we have the body, the response comes in JSON format, which are JavaScript notation objects. Or object notation. So what we need to do, because we're working with PHP and WordPress, is we actually need to convert the JSON to PHP. So there is another handy function here called JSON decode. And this is taking your body, which is in JSON, and is converting it to PHP. And we're going to store this in this data attribute. And once we have the data attribute, now we can loop through those and display them as the recent posts on the site. So let's go down to the actual HTML section of our block here. So I have a row, and I'm going to start outputting the 3 most recent posts. So we're going to use a for each loop, and we're going to, so inside the data, there is a results object, results objects. So we're going to loop through each result, which is, if you remember, we asked for the 3 most recent posts. So there will be 3 results in your object or in your data object. So we're going to loop through each one of those, and we're going to grab the information that we need and store them in the variables at which when we output into our HTML. So as I told you earlier, I like saving the results.json file so I can refer back to it and get the properties I need from the results. So because I want to link so we're making blog cards, and we're going to link off to the individual blog posts on our HubSpot blog. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get the URL to each post on our HubSpot blog. So if you go to your results.json file, and I'm just going to do a quick search here for URL, and you can see there's a couple options here. URL, and we're going to look for URL. So here I found the URL. So as you see, it's nested directly in results, and it's just URL. So I'm going to, once we set each item to post data, I can actually get the post URL, by you just do the post data and then URL here, because that's the name of what is called in the response. So the next thing we would do is we are going to show the featured image. We're going to show the title of the blog post. We're going to show the author of the blog post, and then we're going to show excerpt. So the featured image. So if we go back to the results, and I'm going to look for featured image, you will see that there are some items here for featured image. So here, so this is the featured image, and it stores the URL to the image. So you can copy like this right here, featured image, and then you see how it's camel cased here. So I'm using the exact name that it's using in the response, and I'm doing the same thing for featured image, the alt text. I'm doing the same thing for the title of the page, the author name. And then finally for the excerpt, we prefer using the meta description for the page as the excerpt. I know a lot of people like grabbing the first little snippet of the post to show, but we actually found that using the meta description is a more accurate description of what the post is about. So that's just the way we prefer to do it. So now that we have all of the data that we want to display for each post, we're ready to kind of output these in the HTML. Now, I really should mention that this right here is basically the most simple way to assign these variables. But it is always best to do a little kind of error handling first to make sure that these values do actually exist. So rather than this, and I'm not going to get too much into it, but just know that this is more closely to what it should look like. So you should first kind of check to see if it's set first, because sometimes it might not be set, and you're either going to want to set some kind of fallback for it, or you want to set it blank or set it to false, so that way you don't try to display a null value in your code. So as you can see here, I'm doing a check on every one to see if it's set. If it is, I set it to the value it has, or I set it to empty if it doesn't exist. So now we go down to the code, and this is for each blog code individually. As you can see, we're setting the URL, and then we're doing checks to see if each item is empty, and if it's not, then we're displaying it as it needed. So that is pretty much it. So now that we have our code here set, we can save it. And then if we go back to our page here, now if I refresh my page, you will now see that we have our 3 most recent blog posts, and we are showing the featured image, the title, the author, and the excerpt, which is our meta description. And then all of these link off to the existing post in our WordPress blog.
If you want a step-by-step guide with detailed instructions and example code, check out our document linked in the video description. If you enjoyed this video, check out our other HubSpot Helper videos and be sure to like, share, and subscribe.
Need custom recommendations for your HubSpot portal? Check out our HubSpot Action Plan today.